Okay, so welcome back. I'm going to try to be a little faster so you don't end up spending 40 minutes watching this video. Some of the goals here is just to kind of remind you where we left off. We made some variables, but we mainly were interested in working with the input manager, grabbing some of that input, storing it, and potentially having some ideas of what we would do with it later. And so in this video, what I'd like to do is I'd like to get us moving around and get our pawn, in this case, kind of moving around the game world that we're going to build for it. So I went ahead and deleted some of the other copy pastes that I made earlier. And so what we need to do in this case is, let's say we simply want to be able to take input from the player and we want to be able to move the pawn forward and back, and we want to move them left and right. Yeah, pretty boring, but you can already see if we're able to do that, with the addition of maybe some cool, like, let's see, top down, we could even potentially make ourselves a game of Space Invaders or Pong, just even with very rudimentary input and translation here. So it's not completely worthless. So let's get started. So I mentioned earlier that we were going to cover the input manager a little bit more, and that's what we're going to do first. So if we go back to Engine, Input, Axis Mappings. So we want to make, instead of just some actions, we want to make a couple of axis mappings. And let's try to be, click plus here, and let's try to be a little bit kind of economical in how many of these bindings we have. And so if you recall, in the earlier video I mentioned that axis mappings can go from -1 to 1 or 1 to -1. And think of that as, you know, if you have a gamepad, you're pressing all the way left, that could be 1, and all the way right could be -1, and then any values in between, the center value being 0, could be represented by a float, and that's what this axis mappings will do. So this means, how many do we need? Well, if we're going, forward, back, left, and right, you may think, well, then we need 4 of them, but we don't. We can actually do 2 of them, and so we can name this like forward, back, make the first one that, and then I'm just clicking plus again here, and it will kind of open both of those, and left and right. Okay. So let's do the forward back one first. So now you notice a new field here. It says scale. This is multiplier to use for the mapping when accumulating the axis value. And this is generally one way of, and generally I keep them at 1, but we will use things like -1 and 1. So let's say our forward back, I'm like an old school first person shooter person, so I'm going to choose W as forward. And again, I would want to add a gamepad forward as well, so this would make our input manager able to handle gamepads too. And then it's plus, and then let's do back. S, there's a lot of S's. There it is. And scale for S is going to be -1. Right, this will make some sense when we push it into our pawn. And then left and right, let's do A for left on the keyboard, and D for right. Okay, and by similar, I think I'm going to do, well, let's find out. Let's keep it -1. I bet you I'm going to end up having to change this. Okay, so that's all we need to do to set up our axis mappings, and we have these 2 new axis mappings. So if you recall now, we should have some more things available to us. And so let's go ahead and say we do that up here. I'm going to press C, not X, C again, and say handle our forward back movement. Let's just do one at a time. And so what we'll do then is right click and choose, just start typing forward. And then we have the forward here, axis event. Okay, it's a little different than our action, because it's just going to take that whenever it receives any of that value, which is always, it's going to be outputting some axis value that we have. And so because we had W and S both bound to this axis, we should do the following. You guessed it. Print a string out, and we want to print out that value here so we understand what it is we're getting. And so if I go here and I press play, it's just zeros, right? But if I press W, it's 1, let go, S, -1, right? So W is 1, S is -1. We can remove that. It's going to be very annoying. So let's start moving. And so how can we move our pawn? There's many ways to do this, and it kind of generally depends on whether you're doing say a physics game or something, or whether in our case we're just going to move it and in a way that's like move forward without any awareness of the environment or anything. We just want to move the thing forward. And so how we can do that is because we have this pawn here, we want to move it in a forward direction. All right, so let's just get it moving. So if we drag off here, so you may recall when we were placing and moving objects, we talked about the transformation panel, which is, well, here. Let's look at even the floor, right? So we have this transform panel. We have location, rotation, and scale. So we have all of these things here. What we're interested in doing is, let's say we want to move along the x-axis when you press the W key. So look at the transform here. You can see it's moving up. So really we're interested in location, and we're specifically interested in X, and we're specifically interested in taking those values and accumulating them when you're pressing the key down, right? So as we saw, it was like 1. So we need a way to say, we want to add that 1 over time, and that's what's going to cause it to go, move around. And so if that didn't make sense, it's going to make sense now. So dragging off this node here that was passing us those values, we can type, let's just type location, because we know that's what we want to do. Oh, there's a lot of stuff here. Transformation. So we have a bunch of things. Add actor local offset, add world offset, add local offset, set actor location, relative location. Oh, nice. Okay. So I think this first one is probably our best bet. Adds a delta to the location of its component in its local reference frame. So adds a change to the location. So if we select that, very cool. So now we have a new node. It's kind of one of our first big functional nodes that we've worked with. So target self, right? And so this happens to be a reference to itself, which is the actor here. Delta location, 0, 0, 0, sweep, teleport. Don't worry about that. Let's compile. So if we were to play, we see nothing. We should be moving, right? But we're not, because we're not grabbing that actual value. So this value is going to be a float. So remember, it was just if it's gamepad, it's going to be a -1, anywhere on a spectrum of -1 and 1. And if we were to just drag this directly into location, what's that going to do? So it's converting a float to a vector. If we delete, you can kind of see the vectors is X, Y, Z, these 3 float values for X, Y, and Z. And if I recall our goal here was just the X. We only want to move along the X axis here. We don't want to move along all three at once. And if I play and I press W, remember I'm inheriting the pawn here. And because I have axis values being passed that are 1 and -1, it's kind of cool is if I play and I press W and S, I'm like being translated 1, 1, 1 everywhere. That's not what I want though. What I want to do is only move along the X forward and back for this particular axis. So what you can do is something called a make vector. So if I drag off this axis value, well, you don't even need to do it. You can just right click here and type make vector, and you can make a vector. And then that will return a vector. So we know we want to pass that in, and guess what value we want? Well, we kind of already said we want the X value. So now this axis value will be passed, and then we'll have 0, 0 on the Y and the Z. And so if I play it now and I go W, I'm going forward, and S, I'm going back. Neat. All right, already moving around. Okay, so this is super cool. Let's go ahead and do the other one, which is our left-right. Handle our left-right movement. Sorry about this keyboard. I should get one that's not so clicky. Right, so let's go ahead and say left, right. If I just type left, never mind. Slash. Okay. That's our axis event. And I'm going to select these two here and paste them. Okay. And then what value do you think we want for these? Well, we want the Y, right? And so if we press D, we should be going positive Y, and then A should be negative Y. And I think I just figured out we're going to have a mistake. D would be negative Y. Okay, so I'm back in the input manager. No. So we need to reverse these, right? Otherwise, we're going to go in the opposite direction, unless that's what you want. Okay, so I just changed A and D to have an inverse scale. Okay, and then we want to pass that to Y and compile and play. And now if I do D, I'm moving to the right. A, I move to the left. W, I move forward. S, I move back. Okay, so that is extremely simple movement, but pretty useful, especially if you want to test some, how to have a pawn respond to input, right? Because so far we had just printed messages out, but now we're actually moving around our world. Very cool. Okay, thanks.